On August 21st, 1992, an 11-day siege began between an Idaho family and agencies of the US government. By the time it was over, 2 family members and a US Marshal would be killed, and the government's conduct would come under heavy scrutiny. In 1984, Randy and Vicki Weaver bought an isolated cabin on Ruby Ridge in Idaho, approximately 30 miles, 48 kilometers from the Canadian border. A former factory worker and Green Beret, Randy moved his wife and 4 children to escape what they saw as a corrupt world. A few years earlier, Vicki had recurring dreams of living on a mountaintop and believed the apocalypse was imminent. Shortly after arriving in Idaho, Randy Weaver and a neighbor called Terry Kinnison got into a dispute over land. Kinnison lost the lawsuit and was ordered to pay court costs and damages. This loss did not go down well with Kinnison, who responded in the only rational way possible. He wrote letters to the FBI alleging that Randy had threatened to kill notable figures such as Pope John Paul II, President Ronald Reagan, and Idaho Governor John Evans. In addition, the Secret Service were told that Randy was a member of the Aryan Nation and had a large cache of weapons at his residence. When interviewed by the Secret Service and the FBI, Weaver admitted that, yes, he had attended a handful of meetings at the local Aryan Nation compound, but was not a white supremacist. Fast forward to 1986, and Randy Weaver is now under the scrutiny of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms. While at a meeting at the World Aryan Congress, Randy had been invited there for the first time, he was introduced to a confidential ATF informant. The informant was undercover as a weapons dealer for motorcycle gangs. They met several times over the next 3 years. In October of 1989, the ATF claimed that Randy sold 2 sawed-off shotguns to the informant. The length of the guns was shorter than allowed under federal law, making them illegal. The following year, the ATF attempted to use a sawed-off shotgun charge to get Weaver to act as an informant against the Aryan Nation. Randy told them to get lost. Not one to take rejection lightly, the ATF filed the gun charges and also alleged that Weaver was a bank robber with criminal convictions. This was untrue. He was indicted by a federal grand jury for making and shortening, but not selling, the shotguns. After deciding it was too risky to arrest Weaver at his residence, the ATF concocted a scheme whereby agents would pose as broken-down motorists. Randy and Vicki obligingly stopped to help them, and Randy was promptly arrested. What happened next was mass confusion. The trial date was changed from February 19th to February 20th. The court sent letters notifying all parties of this change, but Weaver's notice was sent not to him, but instead to his case-appointed attorney. Weaver's probation officer sent him a letter stating that the trial was in fact March 20th. The attorney sent letters to Weaver stating that no, the trial is still February 20th, but did not hear back. When Weaver failed to appear on February 20th, a warrant was issued for his arrest. Despite receiving a copy of the letter with the incorrect court date, the judge refused to rescind the warrant. On March 14th, the U.S. Attorney's Office called a grand jury, but failed to provide a copy of the probation officer's letter to them. Without this evidence, the grand jury voted to indict Randy Weaver for failing to appear in court. Now considered a fugitive, Weaver's case was passed over to the US Marshals. From March to August 1991, they tried to negotiate Randy's surrender, but he refused to leave his cabin. The government's patience wore thin, however, and negotiations ceased on October 12, 1991. Nothing much happened until April 18, 1992, when the media reported that shots had been fired at a helicopter flying over the Weaver property. It was alleged that Weaver had taken shots at the helicopter, hired for the Geraldo Rivera show, now it can be told. The reports were denied by both Weaver and the US Marshals, who just happened to be near the property installing surveillance cameras. The helicopter's pilot also said that Randy Weaver did not fire at him. On August 21, 1992, the siege at Ruby Ridge began. 6 US Marshals dressed in camouflage and using night vision goggles scouted the area outside the Weaver cabin. One of the Marshals threw 2 rocks at the cabin to test the reaction of the family's dogs. This got the attention of the dogs, Randy Weaver, his 14-year-old son Sammy, and family friend Kevin Harris. They left the cabin to investigate, while the marshals retreated to a location 500 yards, 460 meters, west of the cabin. Randy encountered the marshals there, and two of them identified themselves, telling Randy to back off. About a minute later, Sammy and his yellow Labrador Retriever, Striker, appeared out of the woods. When the marshal's position was revealed by the dog, Deputy US Marshal Art Roderick shot the dog dead. Sammy Weaver then told the marshals, "You shot my dog," and fired a shot in the vicinity of Roderick. Marshal Larry Cooper then fired towards Sammy and Kevin Harris, who sought cover behind a tree stump. He returned fire, killing Marshal Bill Deegan. Sammy, now retreating up a hill, was shot in the back and killed by Cooper. In the aftermath of the gunfight, US Marshals requested the help of both the Idaho State Police and the FBI, as a US Marshal had been killed. The following day, the FBI drafted special rules of engagement for Ruby Ridge, including: if any adult in the area around the cabin is observed with a weapon after their surrender announcement had been made, deadly force could and should be used to neutralize the individual. If any adult male is observed with a weapon prior to the announcement, deadly force can and should be employed if the shot could be taken without endangering any children. If compromised by any dog, the dog can be taken out. Any subjects other than Randy Weaver, Vicky Weaver, Kevin Harris presenting a threat of death or grievous bodily harm, FBI rules of deadly force apply. Deadly force can be utilized to prevent the death or grievous bodily injury to oneself or that of another. In later interviews, several snipers believed these rules constituted a shoot-on-sight policy, while Fred Lansley, the FBI hostage negotiator, was, quote, surprised and shocked at these rules, the most severe rules he had heard in more than 300 hostage negotiations. He later characterized the rules as being inconsistent with standard policy. Before the negotiators could arrive at the cabin, FBI sniper Lon Horiuchi shot and wounded Randy in the back from over 200 yards away. Randy was about to enter the shed to visit the body of his son Sammy. As Weaver, his 16-year-old daughter Sarah, and Kevin Harris ran to the cabin, Horiuchi fired another shot, wounding Harris in the chest. This shot also killed Vicky Weaver, who was standing behind the door holding her 10-month-old baby. The standoff continued. Civilian negotiators arrived, with whom Randy Weaver was willing to talk. On August 30th, a badly wounded Kevin Harris surrendered, and he was stretchered to hospital. The next day, Weaver and his daughters surrendered. Both Weaver and Harris were arrested and charged with a variety of offenses. The trial began in April 1993. The famed defense attorney Jerry Spence rested his case without calling any witnesses. Instead, he sought to convince the jury through cross-examination in an attempt to discredit the government's evidence and witnesses. In July, Weaver was acquitted of all charges, except two: missing his original court date and violating his bail, for which he served 18 months and a $10,000 fine. He served less than 16 months. Kevin Harris was acquitted of all charges. On August 21st, 1997, he was indicted for the first-degree murder of US Marshal Bill Deegan by the local Idaho prosecutor. However, this was thrown out on the grounds of double jeopardy, as he had been acquitted of the same charge during his federal trial. The actions of the government agencies at Ruby Ridge came under intense scrutiny. The Department of Justice created the Ruby Ridge Task Force to investigate, and delivered a 542-page report on June 10, 1994. The Senate Subcommittee on Terrorism, Technology, and Government Information held 14 days of hearings on the incidents at both Ruby Ridge and the subsequent siege at Waco. Both the subcommittee's report and that of the Ruby Ridge Task Force criticized the rules of engagement, claiming that they were unconstitutional. Randy Weaver and his daughters filed a wrongful death lawsuit for $200 million. In August 1995, the federal government awarded Randy $100,000 and paid his three daughters $1 million each. Despite the settlement, the government denied any wrongdoing regarding the deaths of Vicky and Sammy Weaver. Kevin Harris also sued the government, although federal officials said they would never pay someone that had killed a federal agent. He ultimately received $380,000. Lon Horiuchi, the sniper responsible for killing Vicky Weaver, was indicted for manslaughter by a federal court, but the case was dismissed. The decision was then overturned by the United States Court of Appeals, but the newly elected local prosecutor also decided to drop the case, stating that it would be difficult to prove the charges and that, quote, too much time had passed. Randy Weaver passed away on May 11th, 2022, at the age of 74.